prejuzga y es irresponsable. Para Colombia, el desmantelamiento de grupos ilegales armados, de las guerrillas, lo dificulta la posibilidad que tienen estos bandidos de poder esconderse en el país vecino, donde son protegidos y cobijados por el régimen. Viven allá, cometen los delitos de lesa humanidad en territorio colombiano y se regresan al lugar donde son protegidos. Colombia ha sido merecedor de reconocimiento por parte de la OMS y la OEPS como referente mundial en el manejo de la pandemia del COVID-19. Señalar a Colombia desde la opacidad y cubrimiento del manejo real de la pandemia es inadmisible. Otorguémosle al Consejo de Derechos Humanos la altura de vida y no nos dejemos desviar por pronunciamientos que faltan a la verdad. Más bien, permitámosle a los organismos internacionales entrar y ejercer en Venezuela para conocer las estrategias del régimen para neutralizar, reprimir y criminalizar a la oposición política y cometer abusos contra los derechos humanos del pueblo venezolano. Gracias.
Thank you. And I give the floor to Indonesia. You have 3 minutes.
Madam President, my delegation would like to exercise our right of reply to the statement made by the Secretary General of the Pacific Island Forum, which touched upon the provinces of West Papua and Papua in Indonesia. We must clarify the following. Indonesia has never turned a blind eye to the existing challenges that it faces on the ground. The Indonesian government continues to take allegations of rights violations very seriously. Indonesia is fully committed to uphold the rule of law in ensuring accountability for any wrongdoing committed by law enforcement officials, as well as those committed by armed separatists or terrorist groups. As a matter of fact, the call to investigate allegations of right violation has come from the highest level of our government. A national joint fact-finding team consisting of the police, academics, or national human rights institutions, and community leaders in Papua were established in the aftermath of recent violent incidents in the province of West Papua. The findings from their work resulted in the establishment of an Army military police investigation team, which then opened an investigation against 21 persons consisting of 19 Army personnel and 2 civilians. From these investigations, 9 Army personnel have been declared as suspects to crimes committed, and at present, these suspects are awaiting trial. From here, it is evident that Indonesia has been and will continue to spare no effort in ensuring accountability for any alleged crime or misconduct. On the visit to Papua by the Regional Office of the High Commissioner, preparation to this visit remain ongoing at the moment, but just like other matters, it has been sidetracked by COVID-19. The initiative shows Indonesia's openness and welcoming gesture to the office to see various development progress, as well as the challenging in bringing prosperity in the 2 provinces of Papua and West Papua. We are concerned with the fact that the statement of the Secretary General of the PIF misrepresents the purpose of this visit as a so-called fact-finding mission by the OSCHR to investigate human rights violations in Papua, and urges the Secretary General to rectify this misinformation. I would like to reemphasize what was conveyed by our Foreign Minister yesterday at the high-level segment. Quote, "It is critical that each and every one of us redouble efforts to promoting and protecting human rights in this difficult situation, but we must not let politicization of the Council and double standards prevail," end quote. In this connection, the efforts of the Council must never contradict the principles of the UN Charter. I thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Pakistan. You have 3 minutes. Pakistan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Pakistan is exercising its right of reply in response to the statement made by India. This council has once again been treated to a fabricated script in a desperate attempt to deflect attention from India's well-recorded human rights crimes in occupied Jammu and Kashmir and against its own minorities. Obviously, this canard is neither new nor authentic. This council and the wider international community can see through Indian lies and its compulsive deceit. I would like to draw the attention of the Council towards the independent EU Disinfo Lab's shocking revelations. In its two comprehensive reports, the NGO has exposed in great detail India's state-sponsored global disinformation campaign against my country, including at this very council. We emphasize that there cannot be and there should not be any place for a sponsor and peddler of disinformation at this council. Madam President, the UN human rights machinery, world parliaments, and independent civil society actors continue to call out India for its grave violations in occupied Kashmir. Only last week, the UN special procedures publicly warned the world about India's demographic engineering of the disputed territory and its devastating human rights implications. No amount of guided tours will help India sell its self-serving narrative of normalcy in occupied Kashmir. These public expressions of concerns confirm that India's claim over Kashmir is no more than that of an occupier and a willful violator of UN Charter, UN Security Council resolutions, and international law. Madam President, Pakistan concedes that India knows too well about state terrorism as its principal architect. India has the insidious honor of establishing and financially supporting for over 30 years the terrorist organization LTTE in one of its neighboring countries. India continues to direct subversive activities in my country through more than 85 cross-border terrorist bases. We have presented irrefutable evidence to the world that India has invested more than 13 million US dollar in nourishing UN designated terrorist organizations against Pakistan. One cannot expect anything less from today's godfather of Nazism and fascism, the BJP RSS nexus. From Delhi pogrom to Gujarat pogrom, hands of today's Indian Prime Minister are drenched in blood of innocent Muslims. Just as the victims of Gujarat, the victims of Delhi pogrom, still wait for justice. Madam President, we ask India, is it ready to allow independent observers and media to carry out an objective assessment of the situation in occupied Jammu and Kashmir? I thank you, Madam.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to the Republic of Korea. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. My delegation would like to exercise the right of reply to the statement made by the Japanese delegation on the issue of the so-called compared women. Madam President, the so-called compared women issue is a matter of universal human right that extends far beyond specific historical context or relations between particular nations. Given the gravity of such violence and the immeasurable pain caused to its victim, we strongly believe that the victim-centered approach is the key to ensuring a lasting solution to this issue. Therefore, it is regrettable that the Japanese delegation reported to my government's sincere effort to draw historical lessons from this issue as a mere criticism against the Japanese government. The Korean government has chosen not to rescind the 2015 agreement, considering it is an official agreement between the two governments. However, we also have been taking a clear position that the intergovernmental agreement alone, which does not reflect the view of the victim, cannot be a permanent solution. Accordingly, the Korean government does not aim to seek any additional claim to the Japanese government at the governmental level, but it is also true that the Korean government does not have a right or authority to prevent the actions initiated by the victim. With regard to the recent ruling of the civic action filed by compared women victim against the Japanese government, my delegation would like to make clear our position that it is unacceptable for Japan to claim that the ruling violates international law and the 2015 agreement. The theory of state immunity is not absolute nor permanent. In delivering the verdict, the court took a human rights-centered approach based on the ground that state immunity should not apply to the case that amount to illegal acts against humanity. Madam President, the Republic of Korea will continue to closely communicate with the victim in making every effort toward attaining a lasting solution to this universal human rights issue. Japan will also need to do its part by making sincere effort to restore the victim's dignity and honor and heal their wounds in the spirit of remorse, apologize, and acceptance of deep responsibility as Japan had expressed itself. Madam President, my delegation would also like to exercise the right of reply to the statement made by the delegation of Democratic Peoples of Republic of Korea. As for the woman defector that the PRK delegation mentioned, their decision to depart to the Republic of Korea was based on their own will, according to our information. Having settled down in the Republic of Korea, they are now living as a Korean citizen. The Republic of Korea will exert its continuous effort toward addressing humanitarian affairs brought about by the division of the Korean Peninsula. I thank you.
Thank you. And I give the floor to Mauritius. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. I take the floor following the right of reply exercised by the delegation of the United Kingdom. And I recall, Madam President, on 28th January 2021, the Special Chamber of the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea ruled in its judgment that Mauritius has undisputed sovereignty over the Chagos Archipelago. It also ruled that the UK's continued claim to sovereignty over the Chagos Archipelago is contrary to the authoritative determinations of the International Court of Justice, that the Chagos Archipelago was unlawfully detached from Mauritius, and that the United Kingdom's continued administration of the Chagos Archipelago constitutes an unlawful act of a continuing character. These authoritative determinations, in the view of the Special Chamber, have legal effect. With regard to the rights of Mauritians who are the former inhabitants of the Chagos Archipelago, it is recalled that the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice ruled that the resettlement on the Chagos Archipelago of Mauritian nationals, including those of Chagosian origin, is an issue relating to the protection of human rights of those concerned, and that this needs to be addressed by the United Nations. Before ruling as it did, the ICJ highlighted the United Kingdom's acceptance during the proceedings, and I quote, "The manner in which the Chagosians were removed from the Chagos Archipelago and the way they were treated thereafter was shameful and wrong, and the United Kingdom deeply regrets that fact," unquote. The ICJ also highlighted the recommendation made by the Human Rights Committee on 30th July 2008, based on Article 12 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And I quote again, "The state party should ensure that the Chagos Islanders can exercise their right of return to the archipelago and should indicate what measures have been taken in this regard. It should consider compensation for denial of this right over an extended period." I believe, Madam Chair, that this says it all. Thank you.
Thank you. I understand that several delegations have requested a second right of reply, and each delegation has 2 minutes. I give the floor to the Syrian Arab Republic. Syria, you have the floor.
Can you hear me, Madam?
I can hear you very clearly. Please proceed. Thank you.
شكرا السيدة الرئيس، وآسفة لأخذ الكلمة مرة أخرى، ولكن أمام إصرار وفد النظام التركي على رفض الحقائق أود تذكيره ببعض منها، مع أن القائمة تطول ولا مجال هنا لحصرها. إن تركيا الآن هي قوة احتلال تمارس سياسات التفريق والتهجير القسري وترتكب جرائم حرب موثقة بحق سكان المناطق التي احتلتها بالتعاون مع المجموعات الإرهابية. الأسوأ هو منع المدنيين الراغبين بالخروج من المعابر التي فتحتها الدولة السورية عبر قصفها من قبل هذه المجموعات بإشراف من النظام التركي لإجبارهم على العودة إلى الحدود التركية، كما هو الحال في سراقة تربنا حالياً. أيضاً أود أن أذكر وفد النظام التركي أن جواز السفر التركي قد أصبح الوثيقة الأولى لتجنيد وتحريك الإرهابيين والمرتزقة من شرق وأواسط آسيا إلى سوريا، ومن ثم من سوريا إلى مناطق أخرى بإشراف مباشر من استخبارات بلاده وبرواتب شهرية وبوعود بمنح الجنسية التركية. الآن تهدد تركيا بإعادة توجيه إرهابييها وأفكارهم المتطرفة إلى دولهم، خاصة في آسيا وأوروبا. السيد الرئيس، إن خرق النظام التركي المستمر لكل تعهداته واتفاقاته هي أحد الأسباب الرئيسية لاستمرار معاناة السوريين. شكرا السيدة الرئيس.
Thank you, and I give the floor to Azerbaijan.
Thank you, Madam President. The responsible statement by the representative of Armenia obliged me to take the floor again. This statement demonstrates that Armenia is still far from responsible behavior and building relations based on the letter and spirit of international law. Armenia seems to remain in the self-invented world of illusion and prefers not to take lessons from its previous mistakes. The current situation that makes Armenia so unhappy has become the consequence of its disregard for international law, deliberate non-fulfillment of the relevant UN Security Council resolutions, inflammatory statements, and consistent provocations on the ground. Instead of looking into the future and adequately evaluating new regional realities and opportunities created, Armenia again comes out with statements which, to our deep regret, is an indicator of the destructive thinking of the Armenian political establishment. This way of thinking goes against the framework of peace, security, and cooperation in the region, following the trilateral statement signed on 10th of November 2020 and 11th January of this year. It's nothing but pathetic attempt to inflame the tension and encourage enmity. We strongly condemn this approach by Armenia and call on the international community to persuade Armenia from actions that would undermine the ongoing efforts for restoring peace and stability in our region. Armenia must fulfill its obligations under trilateral statements in a good faith as a prerequisite for normalizing relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan and ensuring the peaceful coexistence in the region. Most importantly, Armenia should refrain from revisionist and revanchist attitude, since its current situation does not favor it, and the consequences of such policy for Armenia are obvious. I thank you.
Thank you, and I now give the floor to DPRK.
Thank you, Madam President. My delegation exercised its second right of reply to remarks by delegation by Japan. The liquidation of past crimes is an unavoidable legal and moral obligation of Japan and strong demand of the international community. Furthermore, it should be kept in mind the international fight to end the sexual violation against women is conceived to prevent recurrence of such heinous human rights violation as crimes of comfort to women. Japan is strongly urged to give priority to the liquidation of its past crimes against humanity, including the sexual slavery, thus demonstrating its sincerity by action. Let me clarify again about the DPRK women citizens who had been tricked to the South Korea. The fact that DPRK women citizens have been tricked to the South Korea against their will was already proved by the testimony of the abductees themselves and investigation of the international human rights organizations. South Korea is once again advised to be sincerely engaged in solving humanitarian issues, including the immediate repatriation of the abductees, thus living up to the expectation of the international community. I thank you.
Thank you, and I give the floor to Venezuela.
Gracias, señora presidenta. Ruego excusas y comprensión por tomar la palabra nuevamente en este segundo derecho a réplica. La delegación de Colombia insiste en usar este foro para incorporar cifras falsas sobre la supuesta migración venezolana, que es la única manera con la que puede continuar una vergonzosa campaña de financiamiento internacional a costa de un fenómeno económico que es promovido desde Colombia y otros países mediante el apoyo y la promoción de medidas coercitivas, unilaterales e ilegales. Desafortunadamente, Colombia continúa embarcada en una senda de injerencia permanente para cambiar el gobierno constitucional venezolano sin digerir convenientemente los continuos fracasos conocidos en tan torpes intentos. Por cierto que hace justamente 2 años, día por día, se celebró un penoso concierto en la frontera colombo-venezolana con el supuesto fin de hacer entrar ayuda humanitaria a mi país, en lo que se demostró posteriormente, gracias a numerosos estudios internacionales, que fue un burdo intento de desestabilización política, tristemente amenizado por artistas y políticos cuya música será poco recordada en los anales de la historia. Todavía se está esperando que el supuesto dinero recolectado en esta mascarada llegue a población vulnerable de la frontera y de Venezuela, y las pruebas de corrupción presentadas por mi país han sido ignoradas por Colombia. Pretende asimismo Colombia señalar en esta reunión, sin prueba alguna, que Venezuela cobija a criminales que se escudan en Venezuela para atacar a nuestro hermano país. Me veo en la obligación de corregir tal aseveración con la fuerza de los hechos. Colombia es quien hoy en día encubre y protege a connotados golpistas venezolanos y ha participado de manera abierta en intentos de magnicidio. Ya en 2008 prestó su territorio para cometer entrenamientos contra el presidente Nicolás Maduro, y asimismo en 2020 promovió desde su territorio una incursión terrorista conocida como la Operación Gedeón. Venezuela ha solicitado reiteradamente el apoyo de Colombia, que no ha hecho más que ignorar la legalidad, dejando en evidencia con su silencio una oprobiosa complicidad. Llamamos finalmente a todos los países a sumarse al camino de la paz y la solidaridad. Seguiremos continuando constructivamente nuestro trabajo de diálogo con la Oficina de la Alta Comisionada para los Derechos Humanos.
I'm sorry, Ambassador. I will have to stop you because of time constraints. Thank you. I now give the floor to Armenia.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please proceed. Please do proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. The key delegations of Azerbaijan and Turkey deliberately distort the root causes of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. In 1988, the parliament of the Armenian Autonomous Region of Nagorno-Karabakh formally requested Baku, Moscow, and Yerevan to support their right to self-determination. In response to this peaceful call, Azerbaijan unleashed murderous violence, deportations, premeditated massacres, and abolishment of the autonomous constitutional status. The impunity granted to perpetrators paved the way for the ethnic cleansing of Armenians throughout Azerbaijan, and further led to a full-scale military aggression against Nagorno-Karabakh. Azerbaijan thinks it can choose a la carte from international law and UN Security Council resolutions by cherry-picking the provisions it finds suitable to its own interests. For Turkey, instead of lecturing Armenia, Turkey should take certain steps to substantiate its supposed goodwill. It was Ankara that closed the border with Armenia, imposing illegal unilateral coercive measures. It was Turkey that refused to establish normal diplomatic relations without any preconditions, and no other way around. Armenia will find the ways to reciprocate should Turkey substantiate its declarations. What Turkey calls unfounded allegations was a genocide. Historians and genocide scholars have established it beyond reasonable doubt that Armenians were deliberately killed or sent on death marches by the disintegrating Ottoman Empire. It was not a collateral damage as Turkey presents it. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, and I give the floor to Japan.
Thank you, Madam President. My delegation would like to exercise the second right of reply in response to the statements by the ROK and the TPLK. I will not repeat the point I made in my previous statement. Japan would like to stress that the 2015 Japan-ROK agreement confirmed that the issue of comfort women was finally and irreversibly resolved, and that President Moon Jae-in himself acknowledges that this agreement is an official agreement between the two governments. It is important that the ROK government steadily implement the Japan-ROK agreement, a promise made between the two countries. We would like to emphasize that over the past 70 years, since the end of World War II, Japan actively contributed to international peace and security. On the issue of abductions, the victims and their families are now well advanced in age. In February 2020, Arimoto Kayoko, mother of the victim Arimoto Keiko, passed away. In June 2020, Mr. Yokota Shigeru, father of Yokota Megumi, also passed away. The issue of abductions must be resolved without further delay. We heard the use of sexual slaves. The position of Japan is that the term does not reflect the facts and therefore should not be used. It is confirmed with the government of Republic of Korea at the time of the 2015 agreement on this point. We reiterate that it is imperative to overcome mutual mistrust and deepen coordination between Japan and the DPRK so as to realize true peace in Northeast Asia. We call on all stakeholders to share this approach and to work together for a bright future. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, and I give the floor to Turkey.
Can you hear me, Madam President?
Yes, please proceed. Please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. We are exercising our right of reply second time in response to the delegation of Armenia. We urge Armenia to stop abusing this platform in order to reiterate its baseless allegations regarding the events of 1915. We also urge Armenia to refrain from politicizing and exploiting history for its political interests. We should understand historical events in their own context instead of taking a selective approach to history. Politicization of history neither benefits the academic search for the truth nor helps the efforts for normalization of relations between Turkey and Armenia. Genocide should not be used as a generic term to describe any tragic event. It is our desire to reach a shared narrative that is based on objective memory, empathy, and dialogue. To that end, our proposal for the establishment of a joint historical commission in order to study the events of 1915 is still on the table. However, we have not received any positive answer from the Armenian side so far. It is in fact Armenia that incites hatred and glorifies perpetrators of terrorist acts, sowing seeds of hate among younger Armenian generations. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President. My delegation will not repeat the point already made regarding the 2015 agreement. However, I would like to re-emphasize the essential nature of the so-called compelled women issue, which is a serious violation of human rights in the context of sexual violence in conflict. It is an undeniable fact that the compelled women victims were coerced into a deplorable situation against their will. This was not only testified by the victims themselves, but also admitted by the Japanese government in its official statement. The historical fact of the compelled women victim was also confirmed by a number of United Nations human rights mechanisms. In light of this, Japan must accept that the compelled women issue, which is a wartime sexual violence and infringement of the universal human rights, constitute a violation of international law, including international human rights norms. Madam President, given the excruciating pain and suffering of the victim, our concerted efforts are required to recover their honor and dignity and heal their wounds. By doing so, we will also be able to provide future generations with a historical lesson to help prevent similar tragedy from taking place. We call on Japan to heed the voice of the victims and survivors and address this issue as a matter of universal and fundamental human right. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have a request from Saudi Arabia to exercise the first right of reply. You have the floor. You have 3 minutes. Saudi Arabia, you have the floor.
شكرا سيدة الرئيسة. تمارس بلادي حقها الرد على بعثة إيران، وتؤكد حكومة بلادي على موقفها الداعم للوصول إلى حل سياسي شامل وفق مرجعيات المبادرة الخارجية وآليات تنفيذها ومخرجات الحوار الوطني ومجلس الأمن وقرار مجلس الأمن 2216 ونتائج اجتماعات السويد. كما تؤكد حكومة بلادي أنها تقف قلبا وقالبا لدعم الاستقرار والسلام في اليمن الشقيق عبر تصديها للميليشيات الحوثية الانقلابية الإرهابية المدعومة ماليا وعسكريا من إيران، والتي أطلقت حتى الآن مئات الصواريخ الباليستية ومئات الطائرات بدون طيار نحو المملكة. شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you. Are there any other requests for the floor? I understand the United Kingdom has asked for the floor for a second right of reply. You have the floor. You have 2 minutes. The United Kingdom, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. The United Kingdom wishes to exercise a second right of reply. The UK has no doubt about its sovereignty over the Chagos archipelago, which has been under continuous British sovereignty since 1814. The UK is aware of the judgment delivered on 28th of January by the Special Chamber of the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, formed to deal with the dispute concerning delimitation of a maritime boundary claimed by Mauritius to exist between Mauritius and Maldives in the Indian Ocean. The UK is not party to these proceedings, which can have no effect for the UK or for maritime delimitation between the UK in respect of the British Indian Ocean Territory and the Republic of the Maldives. The UK has no doubt about its sovereignty over the Chagos archipelago, which has been under continuous British sovereignty since 1814. Mauritius has never held sovereignty over the archipelago, and we do not recognise its claim. However, we have a long-standing commitment, first made in 1965, to cede sovereignty of the territory to Mauritius when it is no longer required for defence purposes. We stand by that commitment. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. And we have a request for a second right of reply by Mauritius. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. In our first right of reply, we have factually advised of the 2 judgments by the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea and the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice that stipulate very clearly that Mauritius' sovereignty over the Chagos archipelago is undisputed. So I believe we have also indicated and actually quoted that in 2008, the UK itself had been asked as state party to ensure that the Chagos Islanders can exercise their right of return to the archipelago and should indicate the measures that can be taken. This was from the ICCPR. And further, I think the UK itself accepted during proceedings that the manner in which the Chagosians were removed from the archipelago and the way they were treated thereafter was shameful and wrong, and the UK deeply regrets that. But we reaffirm that there is no doubt at all about the sovereignty of Mauritius, and this is recognized internationally. Thank you.
Thank you. This was the last speaker on my list for the exercise of the right of reply. If there are no other requests for the floor, I shall now close the high-level segment and the general segment of the 46th session of the Human Rights Council. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, before opening Agenda Item 2, we shall address organizational and procedural matters. You will recall that during the organizational meeting held on the 8th of February, we considered the draft program of work of this session. We have 4 more weeks ahead of us with 7 panels and thematic discussions, 21 interactive dialogues with special procedures mandate holders and expert mechanisms, 4 dialogues with international investigative mechanisms, 4 high-level and enhanced interactive dialogues, and 5 country-specific dialogues. The Council will also adopt 14 outcomes of the UPR. I would like to remind you that on the last day of the session, we shall proceed with the appointment of special procedures mandate holders. I trust that the draft program of work may be approved with the understanding that it is an evolving document and that further adjustments will be made according to the progress of our work. If I see no objection, it is so decided. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as far as states are concerned, the online system for inscription on the lists of speakers for all interactive dialogues, general debates, and panel discussions opened on Tuesday, the 16th of February at 4 p.m. and closes 24 hours before the meeting in which the debate is scheduled to start. Once the online inscription has closed, delegations may still inscribe or withdraw by sending an email to the list of speakers desk. The email addressed is hrclistofspeakers@ohchr.org, as is shown on the screen. The list of speakers will close approximately 15 minutes after the beginning of each debate. The online system for inscription on the lists of speakers for UPR outcomes adoptions will open on Monday, the 1st of March at 9 a.m. and will close on Thursday, the 4th of March at 6 p.m. As you know, no inscriptions will be possible after this deadline. For non-governmental organizations, the lists of speakers for all debates taking place during the session opened online on Tuesday, the 16th of February at 2 p.m. I would like to reiterate that all participants should upload the Word version of oral statements through the online system for the list of speakers. I would also like to take this opportunity to strongly encourage all of you to respect the speaking time limits for all debates and to exercise self-restraint in the preparation of your statements. Along with the Vice Presidents, I will strive to ensure that meetings begin on time and that speaking time limits be strictly observed by everyone. Let me move on to draft proposals. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to recall that the deadline for the submission of draft proposals to be adopted during the 46th session is set for Thursday, the 11th of March at 1 p.m. An extension of the deadline for the submission of a draft proposal can be approved by the Human Rights Council under exceptional circumstances, once only for a maximum of 24 working hours. The submission of a proposal after the submission deadline needs prior approval by the Council before it is registered by the Secretariat. Let me also underline that in accordance with paragraphs 113 and 117 of Resolution 5/1, delegations are invited to conduct open-ended informal consultations to secure the broadest possible support for their initiatives. At least one informal, open-ended consultation should be held on each draft resolution and/or decision before it is considered for action by the Council. In the interest of ensuring the effective participation of all stakeholders in the work of the Human Rights Council, I encourage main sponsors of draft proposals to share draft texts, also with civil society organizations and other observers that follow informal consultations, and to organize virtual informal consultations or conduct rounds of consultations in writing. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I declare open Agenda Item 2, entitled Annual Report of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights and Reports of the Office of the High Commissioner and the Secretary General. This agenda item will remain open throughout the session. We will now proceed with the interactive dialogue on the report of the High Commissioner submitted pursuant to Council Resolution 43/3, entitled Ensuring Accountability and Justice for All Violations of International Law in the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem. It is my honor to welcome Ms. Michelle Bachelet, High Commissioner for Human Rights, who will present her report by video message, and Ms. Nada Al-Nashif, Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights, who is here with us in the Assembly Hall. The list of speakers will close in 15 minutes. Madam High Commissioner, you have the floor.
Distinguished President of the Human Rights Council, Excellencies, colleagues, and friends. I'm pleased to present our report under Item 2 on ensuring accountability and justice for all violations of international law in the occupied Palestinian territories, including East Jerusalem. The report provides an update on matters related to accountability for alleged violations of international human rights law and international humanitarian law in the occupied Palestinian territory. It also considers how to ensure follow-up to recommendations issued to all parties in our 2017 report, and it outlines the responsibilities of third states to ensure that all parties to the conflict respect their obligations under international law. Madam President, serious violations continued during the reporting period. Between 1st of November 2019 and 31st of October 2020, 67 Palestinians, including 16 children, were killed by Israeli security forces and 3,678 were injured. One Israeli soldier was killed by Palestinians during this period and 90 other Israelis were injured. The demonstration at the Israel-Gaza fence was suspended. However, my office observed a disturbing lack of progress regarding investigations into the widespread use of lethal force in 2018 and 2019 in the context of these protests. Available information suggests that only 17 investigations have been initiated into the 231 reported incidents that resulted in killing of Palestinian demonstrators, and that there has been only one conviction. Excellencies, there has been no notable progress in the investigation and prosecution of suspected violations of international humanitarian law, including allegations of war crimes perpetrated by all parties in the context of multiple outbreaks of hostilities in Gaza. This is extremely concerning. Moreover, violations of international humanitarian law continue to be reported. They include an attack carried out by Israeli security forces in November 2019, which killed 9 Palestinians, including 5 children, in Deir el-Balah. Palestinian armed groups in Gaza also continue to indiscriminately launch rockets, mortar shells, and incendiary balloons towards Israel. We also continue to observe persistent impunity afforded to members of the Israeli security forces for incidents of possible excessive use of force in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. In the rare cases where convictions have been secured, the charges and sentences have appeared extremely lenient given the gravity of the conduct. Similarly, there was no notable progress in investigations into allegations of ill treatment and torture in Israeli detention facilities. The recent closure of a criminal investigation into the alleged torture of Samer al-Arbid in September 2019 is of deep concern. Regarding the accountability of Palestinian authorities over this reporting period, I note the lack of progress by authorities in the West Bank, as well as de facto authorities in Gaza regarding incidents of possible excessive use of force or allegations of torture and ill treatment by their security forces. Available information suggests there have been no charges brought against any persons involved in these violations. Madam President, I urge far more efforts by the parties to the conflict as well as the international community to advance accountability for serious violations and to provide redress to victims. Thank you.
Thank you. According to our practice, we shall start by hearing the delegations of the countries concerned. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Israel. You have 5 minutes.
Madam President, this is nowhere near a balanced report. The report is entitled Accountability and Justice for All Violations of International Law. All violations. Yet Hamas is not even mentioned. Hamas, who uses Palestinian children as human shields, in gross violation of international law. Hamas, who controls the Gaza Strip since the Israeli unilateral disengagement from Gaza more than 15 years ago. Hamas, who indiscriminately fires rockets targeting Israeli towns, indifferent to who is killed. There is no reference in this report to the terrible costs and challenges of terrorism Israelis face on a daily basis. There is no accountability for Hamas. There is no justice for Israelis. Do Israeli human rights not matter? Madam President, the State of Israel is a law-abiding democracy with an independent legal system. It is committed to the fundamental values of international law and is fully capable of examining alleged violations of the law on its own. Israel's Supreme Court is widely regarded internationally as one of the most activist and effective high courts in the world, having its doors widely open for petitioners from Israel and West Bank alike. It has not hesitated in the past to hold accountable those it deems responsible. The institutional bias reflected in this report is an ongoing testimony of this Council and the High Commissioner for Human Rights Office, politicization and partiality against the State of Israel. I regret that once again, the OHCHR has missed the opportunity to offset this deep bias against Israel and does not fulfill its guiding principle of impartiality. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the State of Palestine. You have 5 minutes.
تسمعيني سيد الرئيس؟
I can hear you clearly. Please proceed, Ambassador.
Thank you. شكرا السيد الرئيس. بداية أود أن أشكر المفوض السامي لحقوق الإنسان ومكتبها على إعداد هذا التقرير الذي تم عرضه على المجلس مع ملاحظتنا على ضرورة التركيز على التزامات إسرائيل بصفتها القوة القائمة بالاحتلال، الأمر الذي يعيق تنفيذ دولة فلسطين لالتزاماتها نتيجة استمرار القوة القائمة بالاحتلال لانتهاكاتها للقانون الدولي الإنساني والقانون الدولي لحقوق الإنسان. لقد تلقينا بارتياح قرار الإدارة الأمريكية الجديدة العودة إلى مجلس حقوق الإنسان، ونحن نتوقع أن تلعب دورا إيجابيا قائم على مبادئ حقوق الإنسان والقيم الإنسانية واحترام القانون وإعمال مبادئ المحاسبة والمساءلة وحول حالة حقوق الإنسان في أرض دولة فلسطين المحتلة وباقي الأراضي العربية المحتلة الأخرى. أريد أن أذكر بأن مجلسكم الموقر قد صوت لصالح قرارات البند السابع عدا أمريكا فقط التي صوتت بلا، وذلك عام 2014 2015 و2016. هذا الأمر الذي يحتاج مراجعة من قبل أمريكا وبذل الجهد للضغط على إسرائيل ووقف انتهاكاتها والوفاء بالتزاماتها القانونية، وليس بالمطالبة بإلغاء البند السابع كما جاء في كلمة وزير الخارجية الأمريكي صباح اليوم، الأمر الذي نرفضه ونؤكد على أن هذا البند سيبقى حتى انتهاء الاحتلال. السيد الرئيس، لقد شمل التقرير رصد لمجموعة من الانتهاكات التي قامت بها قوات الاحتلال منذ نوفمبر 2019 وحتى نوفمبر 2020 في كل من قطاع غزة والضفة والقدس الشرقية، وخلال هذه الفترة استشهد 67 مدني وجرح أكثر من 3700، منهم عدد من الأطقم الطبية والمعاقين والصحفيين والأطفال والنساء، إضافة إلى احتجاز جثامين الشهداء في انتهاك صارخ لكل الاتفاقيات الدولية والقانون الدولي، إضافة إلى سياسة الإهمال الطبي للأسرى والمعتقلين الفلسطينيين والموقوفون الإداريين، وخاصة في ظل جائحة كوفيد-19. وقد تابعتم سياسة هدم القرى وتهجير السكان والاستمرار في مصادرة الأراضي وبناء المستوطنات الاستعمارية. السيد الرئيس، لا زال قطاع غزة يخضع لأبشع أشكال العقاب الجماعي من خلال الحصار الذي مضى عليه أكثر من 14 عام، الأمر الذي يشكل انتهاكا صارخا للقانون الدولي الإنساني وخاصة ما جاء في المادة 33 من اتفاقية جنيف الرابعة، الأمر الذي يستدعي من المجتمع الدولي والأمم المتحدة العمل على فك هذا الحصار الجائر والذي يتسبب بمعاناة أبناء شعبنا هناك في مناحي الحياة كافة. وعلى الرغم من إهمال المجتمع الدولي بالقيام بواجباته القانونية لحماية الضحايا وحقوق الإنسان وتفعيل سبل الانتصاف وإعمال مبدأ المساءلة والمحاسبة دون انتقائية وازدواجية في المعايير، ومحاولات البعض بتقديم الحماية الدولية القانونية لمنع محاسبة مرتكبي الجرائم تحت حجج ومبررات غير منطقية وتسيء لمصداقية هذه الدول. رغم كل ذلك فإننا مستمرون في حث المجتمع الدولي بضرورة الالتزام بمبادئ القانون الدولي مع تأكيدنا على حقنا باستخدام أشكال النضال كافة بما ينسجم أحكام القانون للدفاع عن حقوقنا غير القابلة للتصرف من أي جهة كانت. السيد الرئيس، لقد تابعتم على مدار الأيام الثلاث في الجزء الرفيع مستوى الاهتمام الكبير من قبل معظم المتحدثين على أهمية مبدأ المحاسبة والمساءلة، وسمعنا عن الجهود المبذولة من قبل هذه الدول لضمان هذا المبدأ، الأمر الذي يجعلنا نتساءل لماذا عندما يتعلق الموضوع بإسرائيل نرى موقفاً آخر؟ بل على العكس من ذلك، هناك بعض الدول الأعضاء في ميثاق روما ومحكمة الجنايات الدولية تهاجم المحكمة، وخصوصاً بعد قرارها بولايتها القضائية على أرض دولة فلسطين، وهذا يمس باستقلالية المحكمة وعملها. إن غياب العدالة في فلسطين هو غياب العدالة في كل مكان، وأن الاستمرار في منح الحصانة لإسرائيل بصفتها قوة قائمة بالاحتلال وإعاقة إنفاذ القانون وسيادة ثقافة الإفلات من العقاب سيشجع الإرهاب وانتهاك القانون في العالم. إننا نذكر من جديد أن ضرورة احترام الدول الأطراف السامية المتعاقدة على اتفاقيات جنيف الرابعة للالتزامات الناشئة عن الاتفاقية، وضمان احترام تلك الالتزامات فيما يتعلق بالأرض الفلسطينية المحتلة بما فيها القدس الشرقية، والعمل الجاد من أجل تأكيد وإنفاذ الالتزامات الدول الأطراف بموجب المواد التي تشير إلى مسؤولية الدول، وتنفيذ القواعد الآمرة في القانون للمخالفات الجسيمة ومسؤوليات الأطراف السامية المتعاقدة التي تم التأكيد عليها في مؤتمر دول الأطراف السامية في ديسمبر عام 2014. شكراً سيد الرئيس.
Thank you. I now invite interested delegations to ask questions to the Deputy High Commissioner and to make comments about the report. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Pakistan on behalf of the OIC for a video statement.
The OIC thanks the High Commissioner for a report. The OIC is deeply concerned over the report creating a false sense of moral equivalence between Israel, the occupying power, and the occupied state of Palestine. There can be no legitimacy for an illegal occupier whose crimes against humanity are well established under international human rights and humanitarian laws. The OIC registered its strong disappointment over the undue incorporation of the occupier's self-serving narrative. This is tantamount to undercutting the very notion of accountability. Such an approach also undermines the spirit of the Resolution 43/3. The report also lacks analysis about the drivers and structural impediments to accountability and is largely silent on decades of impunity for violations of international law in the occupied Palestinian territories. The OIC condemns the ongoing excessive use of force, including live ammunition by the occupying forces, which has resulted in the killing of 67 Palestinians, including 16 children and 3 women during the reporting period. The OIC condemns once again Israel's refusal to cooperate with OHCHR and other human rights council mechanisms. The OIC renews its calls on all states and relevant UN bodies to take decisive actions and ensure meaningful accountability of Israel. I thank you.
Thank you, and I give the floor to the European Union for a video statement.
President, the European Union remains concerned by the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory, including continued violence and loss of lives. The report noted persistent pervasive failure to ensure accountability for allegations of excessive use of force by the Israeli security forces, persistent impunity in relation to allegations against all parties in Gaza, and few steps taken to investigate the members of the Palestinian security forces. The EU recalls that compliance with international law by states and non-state actors is a cornerstone of our human dignity and for peace and security. The human rights of civilians on both sides must be respected. The EU equally recalls the responsibilities of the de facto authorities in Gaza in this regard. The EU reiterates its strong opposition to Israel's settlement policy and actions taken in this context, and we urge both sides to demonstrate through policies and action a genuine commitment to the two-state solution. The EU also reiterates its call for an end to the closure of Gaza while addressing Israel's legitimate security concerns and unimpeded access for humanitarian actors. The EU firmly condemns rockets and other attacks from the Gaza Strip, terrorist attacks and other forms of violence, including growing number of settler-related incidents and incitement on all sides. The EU calls on all parties to fully cooperate with the Office of the High Commissioner on Israel to reverse its freeze in relation with the office, including in relation to the issuance of visas, allowing the office to continue its essential work.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Libya on behalf of a group of African states for a video statement.
Madam President, I have the honor to deliver the statement on behalf of the African Group. The African Group took note of the report of the High Commissioner on ensuring accountability and justice for all violations of international law in the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem. The African Group believes that the full implementation by all parties of the report's recommendations would help to ensure the realization of human rights of civilians, prevent future violations during the demonstrations, and protection of civilians, ensure access to medical services, and the fulfillment of the right to health of injured persons, and ensure accountability and reparations for violations committed. We emphasize on the need for Israel to fully comply with its obligations under international human rights law and international humanitarian law in the Occupied Palestinian Territory, and urge both sides to conduct independent, impartial, effective, and transparent investigations into all alleged violations and abuses of international human rights law and international humanitarian law, in particular into allegations of international crimes, and also call upon Israel to ensure that all victims and their families have access to effective remedies, including reparations and truth, and to resume its cooperation with OHCHR and make full use of OHCHR's technical assistance. Thank you.
Thank you. And I give the floor to Qatar for a video statement.
الرئيسة اطلعنا على تقرير المفوضة السامية وندين بشدة مواصلة إسرائيل القوة القائمة بالاحتلال ارتكاب الانتهاكات والجرائم بحق أبناء الشعب الفلسطيني الشقيق وقتل المدنيين والأطفال وفرض الحصار الجائر والعدوان المتكرر على قطاع غزة. لقد أكد المجتمع الدولي مرارا وتكرارا أن المستوطنات الإسرائيلية والتشريد القسري للفلسطينيين وتدمير منازلهم ومصادرة أراضيهم تشكل انتهاكا صارخا للقوانين والاتفاقيات الدولية ذات الصلة، لا سيما اتفاقية جنيف الرابعة، كما تعتبر جريمة حرب بموجب نظام روما الأساسي لعام 1998. أن غياب المساءلة والتحقيق المستقل والنزيه شجع إسرائيل على الاستمرار في ارتكاب المزيد من الانتهاكات الممنهجة والجسيمة. وفي هذا الصدد نرحب بقرار المحكمة الجنائية الدولية حول شمول الأراضي الفلسطينية المحتلة باختصاصها القضائي، الأمر الذي يمهد الطريق لفتح تحقيق حول ارتكاب الجرائم الدولية بحق الفلسطينيين، وارسال رسالة لمرتكبي هذه الجرائم بأن جرائمهم لن تسقط بالتقادم. ختاما ندعو المجتمع الدولي إلى اتخاذ كافة التدابير اللازمة لإنهاء الاحتلال الإسرائيلي للأراضي العربية المحتلة وحماية الشعب الفلسطيني وضمان استرداد جميع حقوقه المشروعة وضمان إقامة دولة فلسطين المستقلة القابلة للحياة على أساس حدود 1967 وعاصمتها القدس الشريف. وشكرا.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Libya on behalf of the League of Arab States for a video statement.
شكرا سيد الرئيسة. يشرفني ألقي هذا البيان باسم المجموعة العربية. في البداية نرحب بالتقرير المقدم من قبل المفوضية السامية، ونود أن نعرب عن قلقنا من الاستمرار في رسم صورة الأطراف المتساوية بين قوة الاحتلال والدولة المحتلة في التقارير، وندين مرة أخرى رفض إسرائيل التعاون مع مكتب المفوض السامي لحقوق الإنسان وآليات مجلس حقوق الإنسان. إن الانتهاكات الإسرائيلية الجسيمة بحق الشعب الفلسطيني لازالت مستمرة حتى تحت وطأة الجائحة، حيث صعدت إسرائيل من عمليات الهدم غير القانوني للمنازل والممتلكات الفلسطينية خلال العام الماضي، حتى أنها بلغت أعلى مستوى لها منذ 4 سنوات، كل ذلك بهدف مواصلة تغيير الواقع الديمغرافي على الأرض وتوسيع مشروعها الاستيطاني. نؤكد أن انعدام المساءلة عن الانتهاكات للقانون الدولي الإنساني وجرائم الحرب المرتكبة من قبل إسرائيل واستمرارية تجاهل تحقيق العدالة ما هو إلا حافز للاستمرار بارتكاب المزيد من الجرائم بحق الشعب الفلسطيني والبقاء فوق القانون. إن الإعلان الأخير للمحكمة الجنائية الدولية الذي يؤكد أن الأراضي الفلسطينية تقع ضمن اختصاصها القضائي يعيد الأمل في إمكانية المساءلة والعدالة التي طال انتظارها. وفي هذا الخصوص ندعو المجتمع الدولي وهيئات الأمم المتحدة ذات الصلة إلى اتخاذ إجراءات ملموسة وحاسمة للعمل الفعلي لضمان المساءلة والعدالة في جميع انتهاكات القانون الدولي والإحقاق الحقوق المشروعة غير القابلة للتصرف للشعب الفلسطيني وإنهاء الاحتلال وإقامة دولته المستقلة ذات السيادة.
شكرا سيد الرئيسة، وتجدون النص كاملا على الإكسترانت.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Kuwait for a video statement.
سيد الرئيس، نرحب بالتقرير المقدم من المفوض السامي لحقوق الإنسان بشأن ضمان المساءلة والعدالة لجميع انتهاكات القانون الدولي في الأرض الفلسطينية المحتلة. وتعيد دولة الكويت التأكيد على ضرورة وقوف المجتمع الدولي عند مسؤولياته لضمان احترام مبادئ وأحكام القانون الدولي لحقوق الإنسان والقانون الدولي الإنساني. سيد الرئيس، إن هذا التقرير الهام يشير إلى مخاوف جدية من الاستخدام المفرط للقوة من قبل قوات الاحتلال الإسرائيلية، وأن دولة الكويت تدين بشدة استمرار القوة القائمة على الاحتلال بعدم احترام القانون الإنساني الدولي والقانون الدولي لحقوق الإنسان. سيد الرئيس، تطالب دولة الكويت من مجلس حقوق الإنسان بموقف واضح وصريح لإدانة الانتهاكات المتكررة التي ترتكبها إسرائيل القوة القائمة على الاحتلال ضد أبناء الشعب الفلسطيني، نظرا لانجساماتها التي تجعل الكثير منها جرائم حرب وجرائم ضد الإنسانية. سيد الرئيس، أن دولة الكويت تؤيد توصية المفوض السامي لحقوق الإنسان بدعوة إسرائيل إلى الامتثال الكامل بالتزاماتها بموجب القانون الدولي لحقوق الإنسان والقانون الإنساني الدولي في الأرض الفلسطينية المحتلة، وطلبه لها بإجراء تحقيقات فورية ومستقلة وشاملة وفعالة في جميع الانتهاكات والتجاوزات للقانون الدولي لحقوق الإنسان. وشكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this was the last speaker on the list for this meeting. We will now have a short technical break and will reconvene to continue the interactive dialogue on the report of the High Commissioner submitted pursuant to Council Resolution 43/3 entitled Ensuring Accountability and Justice for All Violations of International Law in the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem. I hereby close the 8th meeting of the 46th session of the Human Rights Council. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I hereby declare open the 9th meeting of the 46th session of the Human Rights Council. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we will now continue with the interactive dialogue on the report of the High Commissioner, submitted pursuant Council Resolution 43/3, entitled Ensuring Accountability and Justice for all violations of international law in the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation by video.
Благодарим Верховного комиссара за содержательный доклад о привлечении к ответственности и отправлению правосудия в отношении всех нарушений международного права на оккупированной палестинской территории, включая Восточный Иерусалим. Обеспокоенность вызывают представленные данные о непрекращающихся случаях серьезных нарушений международного гуманитарного права и прав человека на ОПТ, что негативно сказывается на перспективах достижения устойчивого мира и безопасности в регионе. Призываем к наращиванию усилий по проведению расследований и привлечению к ответственности виновных, в том числе причастных к инцидентам с чрезмерным применением силы вне контекста военных действий. Разделяем выводы Верховного комиссара о необходимости проводить оперативные и беспристрастные расследования всех нарушений и злоупотреблений на ОПТ, обеспечив при этом жертвам доступ к эффективным средствам правовой защиты. Исходим из того, что полное и справедливое урегулирование палестино-израильского конфликта может быть достигнуто исключительно на основе общепризнанных международно-правовых норм, арабской мирной инициативы и фундаментального принципа двух государств. В этом контексте хотели бы акцентировать внимание на важности проведения многосторонних переговоров по ближневосточному урегулированию под международной эгидой. Эту роль мог бы взять на себя квартет международных посредников, единственный легитимный механизм сопровождения ближневосточного мирного процесса, одобренный резолюциями Совета Безопасности ООН. Россия, как член четверки, готова в тесной координации с ключевыми региональными игроками способствовать выходу на компромиссное решение. Благодарим за внимание.
I thank you very much, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Jordan. Jordan, you have the floor.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السيدة الرئيسة، يرحب وفد بلادي بتقرير مفوضية السامية لحقوق الإنسان وإحاطتها الشفوية، ويؤكد دعم المملكة للمفوضية السامية لتمكينها من أداء ولايتها المحددة بموجب قرارات المجلس الموقر. ونريد التذكير بضرورة حمل إسرائيل على أن تلتزم بالتعاون مع المفوضية السامية ومختلف آليات المجلس ذات الصلة وعدم عرقلة أعمالها. السيدة الرئيسة، يجتمع مجلسنا مرة أخرى لبحث الانتهاكات التي يعاني منها الإنسان الفلسطيني تحت الاحتلال. إن جوهر تلك الانتهاكات يكمن في استمرار الاحتلال واتخاذه خطوات أحادية تقوض فرص السلام وتكرس بيئة اليأس الذي يعتاش عليه التطرف. فلا قرار يسلب حق الشعب الفلسطيني بأرضه ومقدساته ودولته المستقلة. وستبقى مآذن المسجد الأقصى المبارك وأجراس كنيسة القيامة أيقونات تنادي للحرية والشرعية والسلام القائم على حل الدولتين. وفي الختام، إننا نحث إسرائيل على احترام التزاماتها الدولية وقف جميع الانتهاكات في الأراضي المحتلة، وندعو المفوضية السامية لمواصلة عملها بموجب الولايات المحددة لها دعما لحقوق الشعب الفلسطيني المسلوبة. وشكرا للسيدة الرئيسة.
Thank you very much, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mauritania.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Ma délégation prend bonne note du rapport de Madame la Haute Commissaire. La situation des droits de l'homme dans le territoire palestinien occupé reste désastreuse. Le non-respect persistant par Israël du droit international, des droits de l'homme et du droit international humanitaire demeure extrêmement préoccupant. Selon le rapport, entre le 1er janvier 2017 et le 31 octobre 2020, 354 Palestiniens, dont 74 enfants, ont été tués par les forces de sécurité israéliennes dans le territoire palestinien. En outre, 3678 Palestiniens ont été blessés. Nous condamnons fermement ces violations graves des droits du peuple palestinien. ma délégation exprime sa sérieuse préoccupation quant à l'impunité de telles violations du droit international humanitaire, y compris les allégations de crimes de guerre perpétrés par l'autorité d'occupation qu'est Israël. En conclusion, ma délégation demande urgemment à Israël de respecter pleinement le droit international des droits de l'homme et le droit international humanitaire dans le territoire palestinien occupé et de diligenter des enquêtes rapides, indépendantes et transparentes sur toutes les violations et abus présumés du droit international des droits de l'homme et du droit international humanitaire, en particulier sur les allégations de crimes internationaux, et de veiller à ce que toutes les victimes et leurs familles aient accès à des recours effectifs et à des réparations justes et équitables. Je vous remercie.
I thank you very much, and I give the floor to the representative of Malaysia.
Madam President, Malaysia aligns itself with the statement of the OIC. The full version of the speech is on extranet. We thank the High Commissioner for this important report. Malaysia strongly condemns the killing of 67 Palestinians, including 16 children, during the reporting period. We also deplore the injuring of a further 3,677 Palestinians by the Israeli Security Forces, ISF. The ISF has continued to enjoy impunity. Aside from not undertaking proper investigations, Israeli military prosecutors and courts have shown unjustified leniency to ISF. Malaysia reiterates its call for the international community to ensure Israel's compliance with human rights and humanitarian laws. The Council must not turn a blind eye. It must make every effort to ensure accountability and bring an end to impunity. The only viable solution to the conflict is through the two-state solution and the creation of an independent state of Palestine based on pre-1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as the capital of Palestine. Malaysia will continue to support concrete and sincere efforts to achieve a just, lasting, comprehensive and peaceful solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict based on international law and relevant United Nations resolutions. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank you very much, and I give the floor to the representative of Iraq.
السيدة الرئيسة، السيدات والسادة الحضور، يقدر العراق الجهود المبذولة في إعداد تقرير المفوضة السامية لحقوق الإنسان المقدم إلى الدورة 46 لمجلس حقوق الإنسان. ومع ذلك يعرب العراق عن قلقه من أن التقرير حمل في بعض فقراته المساواة في المسؤولية بين القوى القائمة بالاحتلال وبين دولة فلسطين المحتلة، التي يتعرض شعبها إلى انتهاكات خطيرة وممنهجة لحقوقه. السيدة الرئيسة، يشاطر العراق المشاغل التي تضمنها التقرير بشأن غياب المساءلة عن انتهاكات حقوق الإنسان من القوى القائمة بالاحتلال، ويدعو العراق المجتمع الدولي لتحمل مسؤولياته القانونية والأخلاقية لضمان احترام إسرائيل القوة القائمة بالاحتلال لالتزامات القانون الدولي في الأراضي الفلسطينية المحتلة. السيدة الرئيسة، يجدد العراق تأكيده على أن السبيل الوحيد لتحقيق السلام والأمن هو إنهاء الاحتلال الإسرائيلي للأراضي الفلسطينية واحترام حقوق الشعب الفلسطيني في تقرير مصيره وإقامة دولته المستقلة وعاصمتها القدس الشريف. شكرا سيدة الرئيسة.
Thank you very much. And next on the list is the distinguished representative of Indonesia.
Madam President, the High Commissioner report once again shows the worsening, blatant, and systematic violation of international human rights and humanitarian laws committed by Israel, the occupying power, against the people of Palestinians. This in the middle of global pandemic should be our common concern. Israel COVID-19 vaccine program is another example that highlights the inequality and discrimination that defines Israel government policy toward Palestinians. Hence, Israel must act to ensure that COVID-19 vaccines are equally and fairly provided to Palestinians living under its occupation. Furthermore, Indonesia condemned the sharp escalation in illegal demolition of Palestinian homes and property with the aim of expanding its colonial enterprise, or while Palestinians are struggling to cope with the pandemic. In this connection, we echo High Commissioner call for Israel to comply with its obligation under international human rights and humanitarian laws. This includes conducting prompt, independent, impartial, and transparent investigation into all alleged violations and ensuring that victims and all their family have access to effective remedies, reparation, and truth. For its part, Indonesia will continue to stand with the Palestinian people. Indonesia will continue to support Palestine cause, to support two-state solution as the only solution, and to continue to provide assistance to Palestinians in Palestine as well to those who are displaced. I thank you.
I thank you very much, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Senegal.
Madame la vice-présidente, can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Merci, Madame la vice-présidente. Le Sénégal s'aligne sur la déclaration prononcée au nom de ses groupes d'appartenance et remercie la haute commissaire pour son rapport oral sur la situation des droits de l'homme dans les territoires palestiniens occupés. Alors que le monde a fini de célébrer ce 1er décembre, la journée internationale de solidarité avec le peuple palestinien, force est de reconnaître que la pandémie de la COVID-19 continue de faire rage, causant des pertes humaines et des perturbations économiques sans précédent. La situation est particulièrement tendue dans le territoire palestinien occupé, y compris Jérusalem-Est, où les cas d'infection se multiplient et où la détresse sociale et les difficultés économiques s'aggravent, touchant en particulier les femmes et les enfants palestiniens. En effet, si les Palestiniens subissent quotidiennement des violations de leurs droits humains, le blocus dans la bande de Gaza continue de les priver d'un accès adéquat à l'aide humanitaire. Il s'y ajoute que la poursuite de la colonisation au mépris du droit international compromet les perspectives de paix dans le cadre d'une solution juste et durable à la question de la Palestine. Le Sénégal en appelle aux partis à faire preuve de toute la retenue possible pour atténuer les tensions qui se sont récemment durcies et soutient fermement le peuple palestinien dans la poursuite de ses droits inaliénables.
Je vous remercie, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Venezuela.
Gracias, señora vicepresidenta. Agradecemos la presentación de la alta comisionada, señora Michelle Bachelet. Compartimos la grave preocupación por el uso excesivo de la fuerza de los cuerpos militares y de seguridad israelíes y las graves violaciones a los derechos humanos del pueblo palestino, como la privación arbitraria de la vida y las ejecuciones extrajudiciales. La crítica situación en el territorio palestino ocupado, incluida Jerusalén Oriental, sigue empeorando por el aumento de las prácticas ilegales de Israel contra el pueblo palestino. Desde enero de este año, ha redoblado las violaciones del derecho internacional y continuado la incesante colonización, afianzando la ocupación y menoscabando las perspectivas de una solución justa y duradera. Se incrementan asimismo los asentamientos ilegales y la anexión y también aumenta la opresión y el castigo colectivo del pueblo palestino, con 456 detenidos, incluidos 93 niños y 8 mujeres en lo que va de año. Venezuela condena toda acción arbitraria que busque afianzar la presencia ilegal de Israel en el territorio palestino ocupado y su anexión de facto de la ciudad de Jerusalén que socava la soberanía del Estado palestino. Israel debe cumplir con sus obligaciones internacionales, poner fin a las graves violaciones a los derechos humanos que comete contra el pueblo palestino y rendir cuentas ante la comunidad internacional. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Muchas gracias, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Saudi Arabia.
دعت بعثة بلادي باهتمام بالغ على تقرير المفوضة السامية الذي تطرق لأهمية ضمان المساءلة والعدالة لجميع انتهاكات القانون الدولي في الأراضي الفلسطينية المحتلة بما فيها القدس الشرقية، ويؤلمنا ما عبر عنه التقرير من الافتقار المستمر للمساءلة عن قتل الفلسطينيين واستمرار الإخفاق في ضمان المساءلة عن الاستخدام المفرط للقوة من قبل قوات الأمن الإسرائيلية. وهذه الانتهاكات ترقى إلى جرائم حرب وجرائم ضد الإنسانية. السيد الرئيس يوضح التقرير أن انعدام المساءلة عن الانتهاكات الجسيمة بحق الشعب الفلسطيني قد طال أيضا الأطفال الذين فقدوا حياتهم على يد القوات الإسرائيلية باستمرار صريح للإفلات من العقاب، والذي يمهد الطريق للمزيد من الانتهاكات ويضر بفرص تحقيق السلام والأمن. نكرر دعوتنا للمجتمع الدولي ومجلسكم الموقر بسرعة وضرورة التحرك لضمان حماية الشعب الفلسطيني مما يواجه من انتهاكات جسيمة ومساءلة إسرائيل عن كل الانتهاكات المرتكبة ضد الفلسطينيين. كما نجدد المطالبة بإلزام إسرائيل الامتثال الكامل لالتزاماتها بموجب القانون الدولي لحقوق الإنسان والقانون الإنساني وتنفيذ القرارات الدولية ذات الصلة وتعويض الضحايا وعائلاتهم عن الخسائر الفادحة التي لحقت بهم جراء تلك الانتهاكات، وضمان وصولهم إلى سبل الانتصاف فعالة. وختاما تؤكد بلاد استمرار دعمها ومساندتها للشعب الفلسطيني.
I thank you very much. I thank you very much, and I give the floor to the representative of Iran.
Madam President, my delegation thanks the High Commissioner for presenting her report and hope that those who oppose addressing the human rights situation in the occupied Palestinian territories pore over the report for a second to recognize the depth and brutality of the rights violation there. The impunity enjoyed by perpetrators of violation of human rights and international humanitarian law is a matter of profound concern. There has been no sign of an effective investigation into Israeli war crimes against Palestinians in the besieged Gaza Strip. Committing crimes and whitewashing them seems to have become Israel's modus operandi since the very beginning of the seemingly unending occupation. Madam President, the report shows that 67 Palestinians were killed and more than 3,600 injured last year alone. The international community and human rights mechanisms have failed to address horrendous crimes committed by the occupying regime against the Palestinian people. Palestine has been the scene of the most heinous crimes for decades, and now that the ICC is set to launch an investigation in accordance with its jurisdiction, we strongly hope that the ICC will be able to uphold its duties irrespective of pressure exerted by the Israeli regime's partner, particularly the United States. All the states are legally and morally duty-bound to avoid any action or omission that may be exploited by the occupying apartheid regime to normalize its continued occupation. And
I thank you very much, and I give the floor to the representative of South Africa.
Madam President, South Africa aligns itself to the Africa Group statement. We thank the High Commissioner for her report. While the report depicts equal sides of a conflict with equal obligations and duties under international law, the relation between Israel, the occupying power, and the state of Palestine, the occupied state, is asymmetric. Moreover, equating Israel's willful lack of accountability with that of the government of Palestine.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you because we have a point of order, I understand. I think Venezuela made a point of order. Israel made a point of order. Oh, please, Israel, you have the floor.
Not South Africa. It just took us time to raise our... so I hope it's okay now?
Yes, we can hear you.
It's a point of order regarding Iran.
Please go ahead.
My delegation is forced to make a point of order as a consequence of the abusive and inflammatory language used by the delegate of Iran. The State of Israel is a recognized UN member state, and as such, we request that that you direct the speaker to refer to Israel in accordance with the proper UN terminology and with respect to a member state, and to stop him or her from continuing its deliberation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The point of order will be reflected in the minutes of the meeting, and then we will continue now with the representative of South Africa.
Madam President, should I restart?
Yes, please, because otherwise we get lost.
Madam President, South Africa aligns itself to the Africa Group statement. We thank the High Commissioner for a report. While the report depicts equal sides of a conflict with equal obligations and duties under international law, the relation between Israel, the occupying power, and the state of Palestine, the occupied state, is asymmetric. Moreover, equating Israel's willful lack of accountability with that of the government of Palestine further legitimizes Israel's violations and can be misconstrued as an incentive for it and its leaders to continue with violations. Human rights violations in the occupied territories have unabatedly persisted, even during a devastating global pandemic. Israel has escalated its illegal demolition of Palestine homes and properties at a 4-year high, with the aim to continue altering the demographic reality reminiscent of apartheid spatial development policies. South Africa notes with concern the conclusion in the report that the period under review was characterized by a failure to ensure accountability for allegations of excessive use in the OPT, and supports the Secretary General, who emphasized that the lack of accountability has compromised changes for sustainable peace and security, and that tackling impunity must be the highest priority. South Africa reaffirms its commitment and dedication to the Palestinian people and their existential struggle for their fundamental freedoms and human rights, notably the right to self-determination. I thank you.
I thank you very much, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Namibia.
Madam President, Namibia aligns itself to the statements delivered on behalf of the Africa Group and the NAM. Namibia remains deeply concerned with the ongoing systematic and serious violations of human rights and breaches of humanitarian law in the occupied Palestinian territory. Inaction on the part of the international community continues to embolden the actions of the occupying power, which undermines the possibility of any two-state solution in accordance with the relevant UN resolutions. Madam President, accountability for human rights violations in the occupied Palestinian territory is key to achieve justice and to ensure that impunity does not prevail for those who are involved in these violations. Namibia therefore welcomes the recent jurisdictional judgment by the ICC, which opens the door for an investigation by the ICC into the alleged commission of international crimes on the territory of Palestine. Namibia also calls upon states to ensure that transnational corporations and other business enterprises respect human rights. In this regard, we reiterate our call for the OHCHR to annually update the database of the list of companies involved with the Israeli settlement enterprise and to increase transparency around the update process by publicly providing a timeline for its publication. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank you very much, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Egypt.
السيد الرئيس، تنضم مصر إلى بيانات المجموعات الإقليمية والسياسية التي ننتمي إليها وتشكر المفوضة السامية لحقوق الإنسان على التقرير المعروض على المجلس. إن استمرار عدم المساءلة والمحاسبة على الاستخدام المفرط للقوة من قبل الجيش الإسرائيلي خلال عملياته العسكرية بالأراضي الفلسطينية المحتلة وبما خلفته من ضحايا فلسطينيين أبرياء يمثل انتهاكا واضحا للقانون الدولي الإنساني والقانون الدولي لحقوق الإنسان. إن المجتمع الدولي تقع عليه مسؤولية إلزام إسرائيل القوى القائمة بالاحتلال نحو إجراء تحقيقات شاملة ونزيهة وفعالة لضمان حقوق الضحايا وأفراد أسرهم وتعويضهم عن الضرر الذي لحق بهم. ويعيد وفد مصر التأكيد على أن المسؤولية الرئيسية لتوفير الرعاية الطبية والسماح بالوصول إلى المستشفيات والخدمات الطبية تقع على عاتق سلطات الاحتلال وفقا لاتفاقيات جنيف الرابعة. ونلفت في هذا الشأن إلى أن السلطات المصرية لا تتأخر في تقديم يد المساعدة متى كان ذلك ممكنا حرصا منها على أرواح الأشقاء الفلسطينيين. لقد تضمن تقرير المفوضة السامية مجموعة من التوصيات التي من شأن تنفيذها المساعدة في تعزيز وحماية حقوق الإنسان بالأراضي الفلسطينية المحتلة، ومنع أي انتهاكات مستقبلية بحق المدنيين الفلسطينيين، وضمان المساءلة عن أي تجاوزات. وندعو جميع الأطراف إلى التعاون مع مكتب المفوضة السامية لحقوق الإنسان والاستفادة من المساعدة الفنية التي يقدمه. شكرا.
Thank you very much. And I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of China.
主席女士，中国代表团注意到人权高专的报告。中国持续关注备战巴勒斯坦领土人权状况。注意到高专在报告中对备战巴勒斯坦领土人权状况所表达的担忧。一段时间以来，巴勒斯坦问题出现很大变化，希望国际社会群策群力，推动巴以双方相向而行，尊重互信，为推动巴勒斯坦问题早日实现全面公正解决创造积极条件。中国始终坚定支持巴勒斯坦人民争取恢复民族合法权利的正义事业，支持建立以1967年边界为基础，以东耶路撒冷为首都，拥有完全主权、独立的巴勒斯坦国。中方一直支持中东和平进程，积极致力于劝和促谈，并向巴勒斯坦提供力所能及的帮助，包括大力支持巴勒斯坦及周边国家抗击新冠肺炎疫情，为支持巴勒斯坦等国人民改善民生、发展经济做出积极努力。中方愿与国际社会一道，继续为早日实现中东全面、公正、持久和平做出积极贡献。谢谢主席女士。
Thank you very much. And I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Algeria.
ينضم وفد بلادي إلى بيانات الملقاة من طرف المجموعات التي ينتمي إليها، ويشكر المفوضية على تقريرها ويأخذ علما بمحتواه. ويؤكد وفد بلادي أن العلاقة بين الاحتلال الإسرائيلي ودولة فلسطين غير متكاملة وبالالتزامات والواجبات المتباينة وفق مقتضيات القانون الدولي. تواصل القوات القائمة بالاحتلال انتهاكاتها الجسمة ضد الشعب الفلسطيني حتى خلال جائحة كورونا، حيث صعد الاحتلال عملية الهدم للممتلكات الفلسطينية بغية تغيير الواقع الديموغرافي على الأرض وتوسيع مشروعه الاستيطاني غير الشرعي بتهديمه سنة 2020 ل 470 مسكنا، مما ادى الى تهجير 811 فلسطيني من بينهم 302 طفل. وفي هذا الاطار تحث الجزائر جميع الدول وهيئات منظمه الامم المتحده بعدم شرعيه المستوطنات المنشاه في الضفه الغربيه بما في ذلك الشرقيه، وبكونها تشكل انتهاكا صارخا للقانون الدولي، كما تدعو على انهاء الفوري للحصار للشعب الفلسطيني في مواجهة وباء وفيد كورونا. ما معنى التنمية المستدامة 2030 للشعوب التي ما زالت تحت الاحتلال والمضايقات اليومية؟
I thank you very much. And next on the list is the distinguished representative of Tunisia.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. يشكر وفد بلاد المفوض السامي على تقريره اللي يعكس معاناة الشعب الفلسطيني وحرمانه من بسط حقوقه على أرضه وسياسة العقاب الجماعي المسلطة عليه. سيد الرئيس، تواصل قوات الاحتلال خرقها لجميع القرارات والمواثيق الدولية وفضل سياسة الأمر الواقع عبر توسيع الاستيطان وتدمير المنازل والترحيل لجميع والقسر للفلسطينيين واستنزاف موردهم، وهي ممارسات جائرة تؤكد سياسة الاحتلال العنصرية وسعيه لتدمير الاقتصاد الفلسطيني ومنع أعمال الحقوق الاقتصادية والاجتماعية للشعب الفلسطيني وحرمانه من مقومات الدولة الفلسطينية المستقلة. كما أن حصار قطاع غزة وفرض القيود على حركة البضائع والأشخاص تندرج جميعها ضمن سياسة العقاب الجماعي المدانة بكل المقاييس لا سيما في ظل الأزمة الصحية الراهنة. أن عدم التحقيق في هذه الانتهاكات الجسيمة للقانون الدولي ومحاسبة المسؤولين عنها يزيد من الإثفاء الشرعي على جرائم إسرائيل ويطلق لها العنان لمواصلة ممارساتها. وهذه يحضر الأمل في أن يمثل القرار الأخير للمحكمة الجنائية الدولية نقطة تحول لتفعيل آلات المساءلة والعدالة التي طال انتظارها، فإننا نؤكد دعوة للمجموعة الدولية إلى اتخاذ كافة التدابير اللازمة لضمان الاحترام الكامل للقرارات الأممية ذات الصلة، بما في ذلك قرار مجلس الأمن 23/34 حول عدم شرعية الاستيطان. ونحن على يقين بأن هذا المجلس قادر على تحمل مسؤوليته لحمل إسرائيل على التعاون مع آليته ومحاسبتها عن انتهاكاتها لحقوق الإنسان في الأرض الفلسطينية المحتلة وحماية الشعب الفلسطيني إلى حين انتهاء الاحتلال واسترداد حقوقه المشروعة وإقامة دولتها المستقلة وعاصمتها القدس الشرقية. وشكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you very much, and we'll continue with the distinguished representative of Lebanon.
You see me? You hear me, sorry?
Yes, we can hear you.
يضم وفد لبنان صوته إلى بيانات المجموعة التي ينتمي إليها وبصفته الوطنية يدلي بما يلي. يدين لبنان بشدة الانتهاكات المستمرة لحقوق الإنسان والقانون الدولي الإنساني وقرارات الشرعية الدولية من قبل القوى القائمة بالاحتلال التي تمعن في قتل المدنيين الفلسطينيين وتعطل سبل عيشهم وتهدم منازلهم وتحطم تراثهم وتهجرهم وتبني المستوطنات. كما ويدين بشدة الحصار الجائر والمستمر على قطاع غزة. على المجتمع الدولي أن يحاسب القوى القائمة بالاحتلال على انتهاكاتها، سيما وأنها لا تتعاون مع المفوضة السامية لحقوق الإنسان ولا تقيم وزنا للإدانة الدولية. كما يدعو لبنان المفوضية السامية لحقوق الإنسان إلى تحديث قاعدة البيانات المتعلقة بالشركات المخالفة والعاملة في المستوطنات القائمة بصورة غير شرعية من دون إخضاعها لعمليات التنقيح. وختاما نعيد التأكيد أن الشعب الفلسطيني الشقيق لن يستعيد حقوقه كاملة إلا بزوال الاحتلال وعودة اللاجئين وقيام دولة فلسطينية سيدة مستقلة تلبي طموحات شعبها. شكرا السيدة الرئيسة.
I thank you very much. And next on the list is the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic. Syria.
Can you hear me, Madam?
I can hear you.
شكرا السيدة الرئيس. على مدى سنوات استمر إفلات القوى القائمة بالاحتلال من العقاب نتيجة حصانة وفرتها لها مجموعة من الدول، فتصرفت وكأنها فوق القانون الدولي، وتوسعت قائمة الانتهاكات التي ترتكبها في سعي لتكريس نتائجها على حساب الحقوق المشروعة والثابتة للشعب الفلسطيني. لا مجال هنا لحصر هذه الانتهاكات، لكن نشير إلى الممارسات العنصرية والعدائية بحق الفلسطينيين وأراضيهم وممتلكاتهم بهدف تنفيذ سياسات الاستيطان والضم التي وصلت إلى معدلات غير مسبوقة نتيجة تكريسها من قبل الحكومات الإسرائيلية المتعاقبة. نحث المفوضية على متابعة هذه الانتهاكات والدفع نحو خطوات عملية تعالج عقود الإفلات من العقاب المرتبطة بها، بعيداً عن محاولات تحريف الواقع القانوني المرتبط بالأوضاع في الأراضي الفلسطينية المحتلة كمحاولة المساواة بين دولة فلسطين المحتلة والقوى القائمة بالاحتلال، أو تبني أي مزاعم تروج لها هذه القوى لشرعنة ممارساتها. أخيراً نؤكد على أن توصيات تقارير مكتب المفوض السامي يجب أن تتسق مع التنفيذ التام لقرارات الأمم المتحدة ذات الصلة بالحقوق الثابتة للشعب الفلسطيني. شكراً السيدة نائب الرئيس.
I thank you very much, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Luxembourg.
Délégation s'associe à la déclaration de l'Union européenne. Le Luxembourg reste préoccupé par la persistance des violations graves des droits humains et du droit international humanitaire dans les territoires palestiniens occupés. 67 Palestiniens ont été tués, dont 16 enfants et un Israélien au cours de la période considérée dans le rapport de la haute commissaire. Cette période a encore été marquée par un échec persistant et généralisé de garantir la responsabilité des allégations de recours excessif à la force. Il est primordial que ces responsabilités soient établies et que justice soit faite pour toutes les violations des droits humains et du droit international humanitaire dans les territoires palestiniens occupés, y compris pour les événements dans le cadre de la grande marche du retour à Gaza. Comme l'ont souligné le secrétaire général et la haute commissaire aux droits de l'homme, l'absence de responsabilité compromet les chances pour la paix et la sécurité durable. Lutter contre l'impunité doit rester une priorité. Nous exhortons toutes les parties à mener des enquêtes rapides, indépendantes, impartiales et transparentes sur toutes les allégations de violation des droits humains et du droit international humanitaire. Finalement, le Luxembourg demande à toutes les parties de coopérer pleinement avec le Haut Commissariat aux droits de l'homme et exhorte Israël à accorder de nouveau des visas aux employés du bureau de la Haute Commissaire. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. And next on my list is the distinguished representative of Botswana.
Madam President, we wish to thank the High Commissioner for her comprehensive report. We note with concern the lack of progress reported by the High Commissioner with respect to ensuring accountability for alleged violations and the excessive use of force by parties involved in hostilities. Botswana is concerned that the alleged violations of international humanitarian and human rights law indeed have an adverse effect on the enjoyment of universal human rights. Botswana maintains that lasting peace in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict will be achieved through negotiation, the exercising of restraint, as well as giving victims and their families access to remedy, reparation, and truth. Lastly, we join the international community by reiterating the need for all parties concerned to adhere to obligations under international humanitarian and international law, as well as the applicable resolutions of the Security Council, the General Assembly, and the Human Rights Council. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. And next on the list is the representative of Sudan.
Sudan, please unmute.
السيدة الرئيسة، ينضم السودان لبيانات المجموعات التي ينتمي إليها. طلع السودان على تقرير السيد المفوض السامي لحقوق الإنسان حول ضمان المساواة والعدالة في جميع انتهاكات القانون الدولي في الأراضي الفلسطينية بما فيها قدس الشريف، ويود أن يعرب عن قلقه بشأن ما أشار إليه التقرير من غياب أي دليل على وجود تقدم فيما يتعلق بالمحاسبة والتحقيق بشأن الانتهاكات التي ارتكبتها وظلت ترتكبها قوات الأمن الإسرائيلية ضد الشعب الفلسطيني الشقيق. يرحب السودان بتصريح مدعي عام المحكمة الجنائية الدولية الذي أكد فيه وجود أسس موضوعية تدعو لفتح تحقيقات بشأن الأوضاع في الأراضي الفلسطينية المحتلة منذ العام 2014، ويدعو إلى تسريع تلك الإجراءات بما يضمن تحقيق العدالة ووضع حد لسياسة الإفلات من العقاب بما يساعد في وضع حد للانتهاكات والجرائم التي ترتكبها القوات الإسرائيلية على الأراضي الفلسطينية. ختاما، يود السودان أن يذكر بقناعته الراسخة بأنه لا حل للقضية الفلسطينية إلا بالعمل على تنفيذ اتفاق حل الدولتين وإقامة دولة فلسطين المستقلة على أساس حدود 4 يونيو 1967 وعاصمتها القدس الشرقية. شكرا سيدة الرئيسة.
Thank you very much. And next on the list is the distinguished representative of Cuba.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Cuba, you have the floor.
Gracias, Presidenta. Es inocultable que las graves violaciones de los derechos humanos del pueblo palestino continúan agravándose. En cuanto a las claras responsabilidades de otros estados en el agravamiento de esta situación, hubiéramos esperado que el documento llamara las cosas por su nombre. En ese sentido, reiteramos nuestro rechazo a las agresivas y unilaterales acciones del pasado gobierno estadounidense, en las que se perpetúa el crimen contra el pueblo palestino y en las que no se contempla la creación de un Estado palestino, desconociendo así la solución de 2 estados que ha contado con el respaldo histórico de las Naciones Unidas. Reiteramos nuestro apoyo irrestricto a una solución amplia, justa y duradera a la causa palestina sobre la base de la creación de 2 estados que permita a los palestinos el derecho a la libre determinación y a disponer de un Estado independiente y soberano en las fronteras anteriores a 1967, con Jerusalén Oriental como su capital. Demandamos respeto al derecho internacional y a las resoluciones de las Naciones Unidas y llamamos a evitar la agudización de las tensiones e inestabilidad en la región, que solo provocan más sufrimientos al pueblo palestino y a los habitantes de otros territorios ilegalmente ocupados. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. And next on the list is the distinguished representative of Turkey.
Report clearly registers the human rights violations in the occupied Palestinian territory and the lack of accountability concerning Israel's illegal actions. The use of excessive and disproportionate force against civilians, arbitrary arrests, attempts to erode the status of Jerusalem, the inhumane blockade in Gaza, and expansion of the illegal settlements have all been parts of a recurring pattern which severely curtails fundamental rights and freedoms of Palestinians. The international community should exert utmost effort to stop these unilateral Israeli steps and its systematic violation of the rights of the Palestinian people. In this regard, we welcome the ruling of the ICC and its jurisdiction over Palestinian territories, including East Jerusalem. We welcome the resumption of financial and security coordination between Palestine and Israel, following the confirmation by the Israeli authorities their commitment to the existing agreements. Nevertheless, we follow with concern that this has neither prevented the colonial policies of Israel nor the settlers' violence against Palestinians. Taking this opportunity, we ask Madam High Commissioner to fulfill the mandate of Resolution 3136 in its entirety by annually updating the list of a database of all business enterprises involved with Israeli settlements in OPT. The COVID-19 pandemic has further aggravated the already dire humanitarian and economic situation in the occupied territories. Israel should ensure that all Palestinians have equal and fair access to the vaccination programs and provide healthcare for COVID-19 patients without any discrimination. I thank you.
Thank you very much, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bangladesh.
Thank you, Madam President. Bangladesh joins, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Thank you. Bangladesh joins the statement made by the OIC. We are concerned to see that on the question of accountability, the report has unjustifiably drawn an equivalence between the illegal occupying power Israel and the occupied state of Palestine. This may undermine the spirit of the HRC resolution 43/3. We also note that the report lacks proper analysis about drivers of and structural impediments to accountability in OPT. We denounce the continued excessive use of force by Israeli security forces in OPT. We are deeply alarmed that impunity remained pervasive in OPT during the reporting period. We call on the international community to put meaningful pressure on Israel to immediately end the systemic impunity and ensure accountability in compliance with international human rights and humanitarian laws. Madam President, we deeply regret that the Palestinian people continue to be denied of their right to self-determination. This is utterly frustrating that despite constant international calls over decades to fully respect international law, the occupying power Israel continued to expand these illegal settlements and to escalate collective punishment to the Palestinian people. We call upon Israel to immediately stop expansion of all illegal settlements and halt human rights violations against the Palestinians. We reaffirm our unflinching support to the Palestinians.
Thank you very much, and I give the floor to the representative of Ireland.
Orders with
Ireland aligns with the EU statement and thanks the High Commissioner for her report, which includes a clear call for accountability by all parties. Ireland supports all efforts to tackle impunity for violations of international law in the occupied Palestinian territory, including Gaza. It is deeply regrettable that Israel has made no progress on investigations into allegations of ill treatment and possible torture in Israeli detention facilities. We urge Israel to comply with its obligations under international law in the occupied Palestinian territory. Israel, like every country, has the right to defend its territory. International law, however, clearly defines the circumstances in which force, and in particular lethal force, can be used against civilians. Ireland is particularly concerned by documented deaths and injuries among children. We call on all parties to meet their obligations to protect children in conflict situations. We call on the State of Palestine to strengthen its accountability mechanisms using your office's technical expertise. The de facto authorities in Gaza must also meet their obligations, including by permanently stopping the use of incendiary balloons. Ireland calls for full cooperation with OHCHR. We particularly urge Israel to resume cooperation with the office, especially the granting of visas for international staff. High Commissioner, noting the recent increase in demolitions, what more can be done to ensure accountability and support the victims in such an environment? Thank you.
I thank you very much, and I give the floor to the representative of Oman.
سعادة الرئيسة، يود وفد بلادي أن يتقدم بالشكر لسعادة السفيرة رئيسة المجلس ومساعديها والقائمين على إنجاح هذا الحوار، ويرحب بالمفوض السامي لحقوق الإنسان ميشيل باشلي، ويعرف أن ترحيبه بأغلب ما ورد في التقرير قيد النقاش. لهذا المجلس أن يفخر بقرار محكمة الجنايات الدولية الصادر في 5 فبراير 2021، والذي أقر باختصاص المحكمة بالنظر في جميع الجرائم المنسوبة لإسرائيل التي اقترفتها على الأراضي الفلسطينية. هذا القرار هو ترجمة من جهود المجتمع الدولي الدؤوبة، وخاصة جهود مجلس حقوق الإنسان، وبالأخص تقارير المفوض السامي لحقوق الإنسان تحت هذا البند الذي يعرض اليوم من أجل محاسبة القوة القائمة على الاحتلال. سعادة الرئيسة، إن المجتمع الدولي يستعيد الثقة في المؤسسات الدولية عندما يرى أن للتقارير أثرا فعليا على العدالة، ويرى أنه قادر على تخطي ازدواجية المعايير ومن ثم المحاسبة القانونية، وإن ما صدر على محكمة الجنايات الدولية هو ليس فقط اعتراف بجهود المفوضية السامية وجميع العاملين على هذه القضية، بل هو تتويج لأعمالهم، وهو بذلك يحفز الجميع على المشاركة في إنجاز وإثراء هذه التقارير التي أصبحت جزءا فعليا لإرساء عدالة كثيرا ما يئس العالم من تحقيقها عندما يتعلق الأمر بحقوق الشعب الفلسطيني. سعادة الرئيسة، إننا نتمسك بما شدد عليه الأمين العام على أن الافتقار إلى المساءلة أضر بفرص تحقيق السلام والأمن المستدامين، وأن معالجة الإفلات من العقاب يجب أن تكون الأولوية القصوى.
Thank you very much, and I give the floor to the representative of Albania.
Madame la Présidente, l'Albanie tient à remercier l'Haute Commissaire pour son rapport en application de la résolution 43.3. Nous exprimons notre profonde préoccupation face à la violence et à la perte de vies humaines en territoire palestinien occupé. Le rapport de la Haute Commissaire renforce cette préoccupation, faisant référence à de nombreux incidents affectant les deux parties et souligne que la situation des droits de l'homme dans le territoire palestinien occupé est restée désastreuse pendant la période considérée. Le non-respect constant du droit international humanitaire par tous les parties au conflit et le manque de responsabilité demeurent préoccupants. Le climat d'impunité persiste. Nous sommes particulièrement troublés par la référence dans le rapport de Haute Commissaire soulignant le nombre de victimes parmi les enfants. Nous exhortons tous les parties au conflit à prendre toutes les précautions possibles pour éviter des pertes de vie civile, y compris des enfants, conformément au droit international humanitaire. L'Albanie souhaite rappeler ses réserves concernant le débat tenu au titre du point 7 de l'ordre du jour du Conseil et les documents découlant de celui-ci. L'Albanie partage la préoccupation du Haut-Commissaire qui demande à ce que la lutte contre l'impunité devienne une priorité absolue afin de donner une vraie chance à la paix et à une sécurité durable. Je vous remercie.
I thank you very much, and I give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Excellencies, Slovenia aligns itself with a statement of the EU and would like to make additional remarks in its national capacity. We would like to thank the Office of the High Commissioner for the presented report. Exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, the overall situation in Gaza and in West Bank, including East Jerusalem, remains critical. Slovenia is concerned over violence resulting in casualties on both sides. My country calls again for full respect of international law, international human rights, and humanitarian law. The alleged violations committed by both sides should be thoroughly investigated and prosecuted. Children bear the brunt of conflicts, including in the Gaza and West Bank. Numerous organizations carry out projects for their physical and psychosocial rehabilitation. Achieving justice, including by finding those accountable for their suffering, is also part of healing. In your view, what steps should be taken in this regard? Slovenia believes that the international community should call on all parties to find a just and comprehensive solution to this long-lasting conflict. merging the resolutions on accountability and on human rights violations in the OPT under Item 2 presents a promising sign in the framework of this Council. I thank you.
I thank you very much, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Switzerland.
Madame la Présidente, la Suisse est convaincue que seule une solution négociée à deux États, conformément aux résolutions de l'ONU et aux paramètres internationalement agréés, peut mener à une paix juste et durable au Proche-Orient. Elle appelle toutes les parties à ne pas créer de nouveaux obstacles à cette solution. Dans cette perspective, la Suisse appelle en particulier à la restauration de la légitimité démocratique des institutions palestiniennes. Elle accueille positivement un premier pas dans cette direction avec l'annonce de dates en vue de l'élection législative et présidentielle. La Suisse appelle à la poursuite des efforts pour la tenue effective de ces élections très attendues sur tout le territoire, y compris Jérusalem-Est. Il incombe à toutes les parties d'assurer qu'elles soient inclusives, transparentes et libres. La Suisse considère également que l'avancement des colonies de peuplement, y compris celles de Gavat Amatos et Iwan, et les démolitions d'infrastructures palestiniennes qui s'en suivent, mettent en danger une solution à deux États et risquent de provoquer un regain de violence. La Suisse rappelle qu'en vertu du droit international humanitaire, les colonies de peuplement en Cisjordanie, y compris à Jérusalem-Est, sont illégales. Elle appelle toutes les parties à s'abstenir de tout acte de violence. La Suisse considère que la lutte contre l'impunité est essentielle pour assurer la stabilité et un maintien durable de la paix. Elle appelle toutes les parties à respecter le droit international, en particulier humanitaire, et à poursuivre les violations. Elle les enjoint de reprendre instamment le dialogue en vue d'une paix juste et durable. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. And we shall now turn to the list of speakers for non-governmental organizations. And I first give the floor to the representative of Ingenieurs du Monde. You have the floor.
Madam President, paragraph 30 of today's report invokes HRC 3519, which lists all recommendations from past UN commissions of inquiry about the wars between Israel and Hamas since 2009. First, let the record show that many of these recommendations come from the infamous Goldstone report. Yet today's report nowhere mentions that Judge Goldstone himself, writing in the Washington Post a year and a half later, famously retracted the core charge of that report, namely the absurd accusation that Israel's civilian and military leaders had deliberately planned to murder Palestinian civilians, instead of trying to stop Hamas from firing thousands of rockets at Israeli civilians. Second, let the record show that in this UN list, there are a total of 22 recommendations directed at, quote, Palestinian armed groups, and 551 recommendations directed at Israel. In other words, 25 times more recommendations on Israel than on all Palestinian terrorist groups combined. Something is broken when the UN's highest human rights body confuses the perpetrator with the victim. These distorted UN reports have now influenced the ICC to pursue its own attempts to prosecute Israeli officers for defending against terrorist attacks. Why is a court that was created to hold the world's most brutal regimes to account now being hijacked to target a democracy with world-renowned institutions of the rule of law for defending itself against terrorist aggression?
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the Al-Mizan Center for Human Rights.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, Al-Mizan thanks the High Commissioner for her report and affirms her observation that despite continuous calls over decades for the occupied power to fully respect international law and to comply with its obligations under the law of occupation, violations continue to occur at an alarming pace. This reality manifests from the systematic impunity that is deeply embedded within Israel's justice system. Al-Mizan has engaged for years in good faith in pursuit of the rights of victims and their family members with a system that is not genuine. Yet, every file reinforces our long evidence and a definitive conclusion that Israel is unwilling to genuinely investigate allegations of war crimes and other serious violations of international law, or to hold perpetrators responsible. In the High Commissioner's words, this is a persistent, pervasive failure to ensure accountability. Therefore, to this Council and its members, first, Al-Mizan reiterates the High Commissioner's call to act collectively to stop the serious violations of international law that are being perpetrated in the occupied Palestinian territories, and to enable the Palestinian people to exercise their right to self-determination. Second, to do so by supporting the international law and fact-based resolutions concerning the rights of Palestinians, in particular on accountability. Third, and to welcome the territorial judgment of the ICC while encouraging the court to open a full investigation as the only viable deterrent to continued impunity and violence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we'll continue with the Institute for NGO Research.
Here to discuss accountability. So let's talk about UN accountability. In August 2019, 3 Palestinian terrorists planted a bomb, murdering an Israeli girl and injuring her father and brother. Palestinian terrorism is nothing unique, but in this case, the 3 men responsible were all senior officials at NGOs that closely partner with and are funded by UN agencies. One of those NGOs even helps coordinate UN OCHA's humanitarian team. Since the murder, the UN has conducted no investigations and has refused to end cooperation or freeze funding. This is not an aberration. The UN, with impunity, routinely funds and partners with many NGOs closely linked to Palestinian terror groups. Some of these groups are even put in charge of children's programming. Many of these NGOs provided the High Commissioner with the materials she used for the report we are discussing today. In other words, terror-linked NGOs are intricately involved in the UN's Palestinian programs and reporting mechanisms. But not even child murder was enough for UN agencies to pause and reevaluate their actions. Instead, UN officials and rapporteurs have used their platforms to attack those who have exposed these immoral partnerships. So we asked the High Commissioner, when the UN enables human rights violations, where is its accountability?
Thank you very much, and we'll continue with Norwegian Refugee Council.
We thank the High Commissioner for the account she has provided in her report and echo the call upon states to take all necessary measures to ensure respect with international human rights and humanitarian law. For the Norwegian Refugee Council, a humanitarian organization serving the displaced and vulnerable in occupied Palestinian territory, compliance by all parties with rules governing humanitarian relief and fundamental guarantees of protection is of growing concern. Israeli violations of international law are by now well documented and confirmed by judicial and UN bodies. The humanitarian impact of these grave breaches on Palestinians irrefutably visible. We are reminded that most of the norms violated are of peremptory character and create obligations vis-a-vis the international community as a whole. Cooperation in bringing these violations to an end, in reclaiming the normative, civic, and humanitarian space in Palestine, could only mean concerted and meaningful action well beyond condemnation of wrongfulness. It is an obligation incumbent upon this Council to support, not to obstruct, cooperative action taken for the purpose of bringing violations to an end. Nothing short would rectify practices that disenfranchise Palestinians and manufacture their humanitarian vulnerability and needs. Nothing but would allow humanitarians to complete their mission in Palestine with the knowledge that rights have been respected and people are indeed protected.
Thank you very much. Next is medical aid for Palestinians.
One of 810 health workers shot, wounded, or killed during the 2018-19 Great March of Return protests in Gaza by Israeli forces amid their systematic use of live ammunition, rubber-coated steel bullets, and tear gas. I was never a threat and was only carrying out my duties as a field doctor. The first paramedic to treat me, Musa Abu Hassanin, later became the first of 4 health workers who were killed while working at the protests. In 2019, the UN Independent Commission of Inquiry on the Gaza protests found reasonable grounds to believe that Israeli snipers intentionally shot health workers, calling the occupied Palestinian territories one of the most dangerous places in the world for healthcare workers. I addressed the Council 2 years ago as one of the named victims and warned that without action from the international community, healthcare in the occupied Palestinian territory would continue to come under attack. Since that day, a further 169 health workers have come under attack in the occupied Palestinian territory. In 2019, 226 attacks caused 304 injuries and damage to at least 35 ambulances. In 2020, the World Health Organization documented at least 56 more attacks. 2 months ago, 3 Palestinian hospitals were attacked by Israeli forces. One was a children's hospital. Yet again, nobody's been held accountable despite clear recommendations from the UN Commission of Inquiry. A report by Medical Aid for Palestinians, Al Mizan Center for Human Rights, and Lawyers for Palestinian Human Rights documents Israel's persistent failure to genuinely investigate attacks on healthcare. Member states must pursue accountability for attacks on medical personnel and facilities to ensure justice for victims, to deter further violence, and to end impunity.
Thank you very much. Next is United Nations Watch.
Madam President, the report before us today recalls all of this Council's past commissions of inquiry, which characterized Israel's defense against Hamas rockets and other terrorist attacks as war crimes. It introduces new allegations and encourages attempts to prosecute Israeli officers in the International Criminal Court. We'd like to ask about what's missing. Why does today's report not mention even once the word Hamas, the terrorist organization that openly calls for the destruction of Israel? Why is there no mention of the Islamic Republic of Iran, the state party that arms, trains, and funds Hamas and Islamic Jihad? Why does the report not mention that both of those terrorist groups openly commit war crimes by firing rockets at Israeli civilians, as well as the double war crime of firing from densely populated areas in order to use their own Palestinian civilians as human shields? Why does the report not mention that Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and other Palestinian terrorist groups are responsible for launching all of the wars, hostilities, violent border confrontations, car rammings, shootings, incendiary kites and balloons, and other attacks which have been the cause and provocation of the Israeli defense actions that are the subject of this report? Madam President, why are the concepts of international law and human rights being twisted to demonize a democracy and to incentivize terrorist groups to launch more attacks and cause more deaths of Israelis and Palestinians? I thank you.
Thank you. We'll continue with a joint statement by Al-Haq, Law in the Service of Men, co-sponsored by the Al-Mizan Center for Human Rights.
Thank you, Madam President. In her accountability report to this Council session, the High Commissioner rightfully referred to Israel's unlawful and prevalent climate of impunity, stressing that, and I quote, "Impunity must be the highest priority," end quote. It is within the context of prolonged refugeehood, 53 years of occupation, 13 years of closure in Gaza, continued maintenance of institutionalized racial domination and oppression over the Palestinian people as a whole, and an ongoing process of displacement, disposition, and erasure that we continue to address the Council and its member states, urging them to put an end to Israel's systematic and widespread impunity. Madam President, the recent decision of the pre-trial chamber of the International Criminal Court affirming that the court has full territorial jurisdiction over the occupied Palestinian territory is a crucial first step towards long-denied justice. For decades, Israel has shown that it is unable and unwilling to hold itself accountable for human rights violations, war crimes, and crimes against humanity committed against the Palestinian people. Third states must adhere to their legal obligations and take meaningful and effective steps to ensure that Israel's impunity is brought to an end and international justice and accountability are finally achieved without further delay, including by fully supporting the opening of a full, comprehensive, and thorough investigation into the situation in the state of Palestine before the ICC, including the crime of apartheid. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll continue with the Cairo Institute for Human Rights Studies.
Madam President, in order to ensure effective accountability and redress for Palestinians who have endured structural oppression, dispossession, fragmentation, and subjugation for decades, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and UN member states need to accurately characterize the situation in Palestine. This starts by acknowledging Israel's institutionalized regime of systematic domination and oppression over the Palestinian people, amounting to the crime of apartheid as defined by the Rome Statute of the ICC. In the context of growing recognition of Israel's apartheid by UN treaty bodies, special procedures, member states, and civil society organizations around the world, we regret that the OHCHR's recent report on accountability does not address the root causes of the structural oppression in Palestine resulting from Israel's ongoing colonization and apartheid, and addresses the situation as one of a conflict with parties on equal footing. We also regret that the OHCHR failed to note and welcome in its report the decision of the pre-trial chamber confirming the court's territorial jurisdiction in the OPT. We urge the OHCHR to support the ICC in the opening of an investigation into war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in Palestine, in line with the findings of UN commissions of inquiry and fact-finding missions. We further urge third states to act upon their obligations to not recognize, render aid or assistance to the apartheid system established by Israel, and cooperate to bring the illegal situation to an end in order to realize the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and to return. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we'll continue with Defense for Children International.
Madam President, in December, Defense for Children International Palestine released Isolated and Alone, an evidence-based report detailing the experience and rights violations against Palestinian child detainees held in isolation by Israeli authorities solely for interrogation purposes. The report found that the physical and social isolation of Palestinian children by Israeli authorities is a practice that constitutes solitary confinement, amounting to torture or cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment under international law norms. Administrative detention is permitted in only the most exceptional cases for imperative reasons of security when there is no other alternative. UN bodies, including the Committee Against Torture, the Human Rights Committee, and the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, have expressed concern and called on Israel to refrain from using the procedure. Custodial pretrial detention is the norm for Palestinian children detained by Israeli forces from the occupied West Bank. Even while facing an unprecedented global health pandemic, Palestinian children imprisoned by Israeli authorities live in close proximity to each other, often in compromised sanitary conditions. We strongly urge all state members to demand that Israeli authorities immediately end detention and prosecution of Palestinian children in the Israeli military court system, demand that Israeli authorities end the practice of detaining children under administrative detention orders, and call for the release of all Palestinian children currently detained in Israeli prisons and detention centers. I thank you.
Thank you very much. And next is Women's Center for Legal Aid and Counseling.
21 testimonies of women in Gaza suffering from cancer, chronic diseases, are denied access to healthcare in West Bank and Jerusalem hospitals. One of these cases is Maisa Talib, a 40-year-old mother diagnosed with breast cancer, is unable to access treatment in Jerusalem due to travel restriction imposed by Israel. The year 2020 also marked the second highest year of house demolitions since 2009. Wiglak believes in this proportionate impact house demolitions have on girls and women, simultaneous to the increased gendered violence during the global pandemic, since the Palestinian women are the caregivers in their homes. Ensuring sanitized environment amid the targeting of sanitization structure during COVID-19 is a main concern that has become difficult to fulfill and nearly impossible without a shelter. We urge the Council to call on Israel to cease the discriminatory practices and policies that negatively impact the physical and psychological well-being of women, Palestinian women and their families. This includes the halt of practices of forced eviction and demolition threats, as well as the restriction of movement to access healthcare amid COVID-19 outbreak. We urge states to take effective measures to end impunity, to uphold their obligations, to ensure respect and promote international accountability.
I thank you very much. This was the last NGO speaker that we could accommodate for this dialogue. I understand that previously today the connection was lost when the distinguished representative of Libya wanted to make a statement. So when there is no objection, I would like to give the floor exceptionally to Libya to make a statement because of the virtual nature of this session. And Libya will speak in its national capacity. Libya, you have the floor.
شكرا سيدة الرئيسة، ونشكر المفوض السامي على ما قدمته من معلومات في تقريرها، ونعرب عن قلقنا العميق بشأن انعدام المساءلة عن الانتهاكات التي تمارسها سلطات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي في حق الشعب الفلسطيني، لا سيما في ظل تفشي جائحة كوفيد 19. كما ندين أيضا الهيمنة التوسعية لسلطات الاحتلال وتدمير ممتلكات الشعب الفلسطيني وبناء المستوطنات الغير مشروعة، الأمر الذي زاد من تهجير ما يقارب 811 فلسطينيا خلال عام 2020. ونشاطر المفوض السامي على ما ورد في توصياتها بضرورة امتثال إسرائيل الكامل لالتزاماتها بموجب القانون الدولي الإنساني في الأراضي الفلسطينية المحتلة، وضرورة قيام إسرائيل بضمان وصول جميع الضحايا وأسرهم إلى سبيل الانتصاف الفعالة والتعويضات والكشف عن الحقيقة. سيد الرئيسة، إن انعدام المساءلة عن الانتهاكات للقانون الدولي الإنساني وجرائم الحرب المرتكبة من قبل إسرائيل تعد استمرارا لتجاهل تحقيق العدالة وزيادة ظاهرة الإفلات من العقاب وتقويض فرص تحقيق السلام والأمن المستدام. عليه ندعو جميع الدول وهيئات الأمم المتحدة إلى اتخاذ كافة التدابير الضرورية التي تكفل الاحترام الكامل للقرارات والقوانين الدولية لضمان المحاسبة الفعالة والنزيهة لجميع الانتهاكات والتجاوزات وتمكين الشعب الفلسطيني من ممارسة حقه في تقرير مصيري. شكرا السيد الرئيس.
Thank you very much. This was the last speaker on the list, and I now give the floor to the Deputy High Commissioner for her concluding remarks. You have the floor.
For all the comments. Let me start by referring to the comment of Ireland, the question actually on demolitions. I think we particularly spoke to demolitions within the context of collective punishment, as it is explicitly prohibited by international humanitarian law for violating a range of human rights, obviously, and forced evictions and home demolitions, including these punitive demolitions, have disproportionately, we heard again, affected Palestinian women and girls, especially female heads of household, and then the impact on physical and psychological well-being. So in this case, the call is for Israel to desist from demolishing homes and destroying private property. In fact, the humanitarian coordinator issued a statement this morning in that regard to desist from other acts, for example, the need to address settler violence, which creates an environment that may often coerce people to leave their homes because of the threats that are real or perceived. The importance of allowing unfettered access of humanitarian assistance to those people who then become displaced from their own homes as a case of suffering from demolitions. And also to ensure that urban planning regimes must be compliant with international law, with due notice to the processes of alerting citizens and residents and moving in an orderly fashion. Some of that speaks to the point raised by Slovenia on justice and healing. Obviously, this is the segment we talk about accountability. It points to the priority of ending impunity. I think the issue is very clearly allowing institutionalizing transparent investigations that will allow victims the opportunity, the chance, the due process to address these grievances. One more set of issues that came up was the issue regarding the lack of reference to rockets and the de facto authorities, Hamas. Let me just say that there are several paragraphs which actually refer to these points, paragraph 10, paragraph 26, paragraph 27, which ensure that we continue to monitor widespread allegations of ill treatment in Gaza, of complaints that have been received and investigated or not, as they should be, and also, as mentioned, the indiscriminate launching of rockets and mortar shells towards Israel by Palestinian armed groups. So there are several mentions that respond to that query, I hope. Thank you very much, Madam Vice President.
I thank you very much, and this brings us to the end of the interactive dialogue. I wish to thank the High Commissioner and the Deputy High Commissioner for their participation at this meeting. Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we shall now begin the interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea, who will present his oral update pursuant to Council Resolution 44/1. The list of speakers will close in 15 minutes. And I now give the floor to Mr. Mohammed Abdelsalam Babiker. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you. Esteemed Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to present my first oral update to the Council since taking up the role of a Special Rapporteur last November 2020. In my update today, I will focus on the human rights of Eritrean refugees and asylum seekers in the context of the ongoing Tigray crisis in Ethiopia, which actually added a new complicated dynamic in the monitoring